Are you ready to take your drawing to the next level, to make them look three-dimensional, to make them look like photographs? Well, this next step is going to be an important part of that. We've had fun practicing contour drawings so far in this set of tutorials, and by now you know that drawing from observation is going to help you to really see what you're looking at and to trust your eyes and your hand and your pen. But now let's move on to something else that's very important for drawing: light and shadow. And they'll allow you to add much more dimension to your drawing. Okay, so light helps us to see things, but it actually does a whole lot more. It helps us to feel things as well. It helps us to feel that a flat drawing on a piece of paper is actually a three-dimensional object. And it helps us to feel mood as well. The difference between how we feel on a bright sunny day at the beach, or a dramatic scene from a film noir from the 1940s, or a flat, gloomy, rainy day. We need to understand how light behaves when it hits an object so we can convey what it'll look like and how it makes us feel. And we want to be able to draw what we see, but also know enough about light so that we can create our own lighting conditions. We can make them up in our imaginations if we want to heighten a particular feeling. So as we move the light, the mug changes. The moving light reveals the dimensions of the mug and the textures, the positions of the elements. Just by moving a light around an object, we can totally change its personality. Even a simple shape like this mug has lots of subtle things to discover. Look at where the light is hitting the cup and where it makes its shadows. Shadows are mainly on one side, but even on this dark side of the cup, we can still see areas of light, like on the top of the handle and on the light side of the cup. And there's darkness too on the inside, the upper right. The mug throws a shadow on the ground on the left, but there's also some shadow on the bottom right that tells us the edge of the mug tucks under. We also see bright white highlights along the extreme right part of it, as well as along the rim. And they tell us that this mug is made out of something shiny that's reflecting the light. All right, let's talk about what the light is doing. Let's start with a simple shape, an egg. Okay, now let's add a light source. The light beam hits the egg on one side, which becomes light, and the other side is thrown into shadow. And now we have three different levels of light. We have bright, we have medium, and we have dark. And of course, the light is throwing a shadow onto the surface that the egg is sitting on. All right, let's take a more complex shape. We'll call the shape Bob. Now, when the bulb comes on, it lights Bob from the left, and the right side is thrown into shadows. But now, unlike the egg, Bob has a nose, and that nose gets its own shadow, and his ears stick out a bit, so they pick up a rim of light, just like the mug handle. And finally, Bob throws a shadow against the wall behind him. All right, let's try doing that same thing that we just did with Bob with me. So my head is a bit like an egg too, so if you prefer to draw an egg, you could do that too. But I'm just going to draw quickly. Here's my general features. Here's my shirt, and okay, so there's my head, and I'm going to take just a gray marker. You can get any kind of a gray marker. This happens to be an Ecoline marker. Any one doesn't really matter. But all we want to do is we don't want to just use the gray to kind of lay down where we're seeing this is the darkest part over here, right? This is the dark part of my face. And then we look here and I can see around my eye that there is, there's a bit of light in my eye, but this part is pretty dark because it's in this sort of shadow under my nose. And this ear is pretty dark. And let's just kind of make it generally just flat. So then we look at the side of my nose. We look at the shadow that's being thrown by my nose. And there's a little bit of there. And then there's this. And then you can see the roundness of my chin. And then you can see that my head has thrown a bit of a shadow on my neck. And then, of course, this part of my shirt is basically in shadow. This part is particularly dark. And there's my t-shirt underneath here. Now let's look at this side. This shirt is being lit, again, from the side. Everything is coming from this side. So it's throwing a shadow here, the shirt is throwing a shadow. This part of the collar is throwing a shadow. And underneath my eye, there's a bit of a shadow. I didn't sleep that well last night. And then here, this kind of pudgy part of my face there. And this whole part is kind of lit. And then there's a little bit of shadow in here, let's say. A little bit of shadow there. And that's basically it. So that's how I look at this shadow, at this shading. And I say, okay, I see, well, actually, this isn't really that light. And then, so that is a decent representation of this in two colors, in two tones. But then I can say, you know what, this side of it is actually even darker. So what I can do is I can now start adding another layer. I'm adding another layer onto this side to make it even darker. So it's really a third tone that is over here. This inside of my shirt collar, and then down here below is much darker. So this, and then there's this sort of roundness on my nose here. And yeah, this part is pretty dark. This is just using three simple tones. We're able to create a sense of dimension. All right, let's do the same exercise now with this pencil. Again, I'm just adding in where I see the first tone. So this is basically two-tone, light and dark, or light and medium. It's going to turn out to be medium dark. Let's now add our darker darks. So I'm going to go back over here again with a pencil, and I can just do it this way. And I'm just adding in those parts that seem darkest. Just a second, you notice that there's a little bit of light here on this side of my face. Probably light bouncing off the wall or something. So I might want to capture that. You see how much darker this layer of dark is. So now we have dark, medium, and light. But you know, when I look at my face, there's actually yet another version of that, which is that this part of my face is actually still got some tone on it. This highlight is still much brighter. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to add yet another level of this tone. It's sort of a lighter than, it's not quite white, but it's also not quite the middle tone. So I'm just kind of giving my overall face just this little bit of tone there, because that seems more accurate. But it's also, I'm leaving these highlights. You see there's a highlight there, highlight there, highlight here. And you can see here, highlight, 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 highlight. You might be saying to yourself, I don't know how I can get those three levels, but you can do it by practicing. So let's say you draw yourself a square like this. And you might say to yourself, okay, I want to go from light to dark. So one way you could do it is you could do this light, you could do this darker, you can do this darkest still, right? And then you do have some gradation that goes from dark to light. Here's another way you could do that, is you could draw your squares, and you could say, you know what, I'm going to draw exactly the same lines going all the way across. So now these three boxes are basically the same value, right? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go at an angle, and I'm going to draw lines that go at an angle, but they stop here on this box. So now we have white, light, medium, medium. Now I can draw another set of lines here like this that only go in this box. And now using just lines, I've gone from dark to light. You see? And you could even do many, many variations in between. You could make, 10 boxes like that and just go from light to dark. So that's a good way of practicing getting that kind of a sense of control that takes you from this one thing to another. Now, this also makes you think, well, maybe I don't need to have this soft part of the pencil to make these tones. Maybe I can just do it with lines, and you can. And this is called hatching, and cross-hatching. Maybe you've heard this term. Hatching basically means that you have lines that go like this. They're parallel to each other. They're certain distance apart. They're straight. And they could be much closer to each other. And you can see the closer they get to each other, the darker the overall tone. And they could be right up next to each other, and then it would be virtually black. And similarly, they could also be much further apart. So that's hatching. Cross-hatching is what we just did, where you basically go across that with another set of hatches. And then you can go across it with another set of hatches. And then you could go another direction. And you could just keep layering on your cross hatches until you get whatever degree of tone you want. That's another thing you might want to start practicing is, can you draw parallel lines like this as easily and quickly as I'm doing it? Keeping them evenly spaced. It's a really important thing. So that's the thing when you're doing hatching, you want to make sure that your lines are basically flowing in the same direction. You don't want to just kind of go like this, like that. It starts to look messy. It's not as clear a message as opposed to I'm drawing this set of lines and then I'm drawing this set of lines and so forth. So if we want to do this with cross-hatching, it's a similar kind of analysis that we'll do, again, looking at where are the lines. And I'm going to start by doing the kind of the mid-tone of this thing. So I look at my head and I go, okay, what I'm going to just do a mid-tone. So that is, you can see my lines are a little bit closer there, but I'm going to be doing cross-hatching. I know that. So I can just keep this set of lines, basically just keeping it parallel, and I'm just going to go through the whole thing. Now I'm going to try and define the middle of that. So the stuff that is kind of number 2 out of the 3 that I have. So, okay, so now you can see that there's 1, 2, 3 tones. And I could add another one. I could say, let me look for the stuff that's really dark. Like in here, it's much darker. And under here, it's darker. But I want to give myself room to maneuver. So therefore, I don't want to immediately go to the darkest part. I want to build up my tones. Because you can't make it lighter, really, with cross-hatching. You can't erase it. I've shown you 3 different ways of adding tone. One is with a gray marker, where you just keep layering on layers of marker. So 1 coat, layer 1, 2 coats, 3 coats, and so forth. So that way, you're basically just using pure color that gets progressively darker. The second way of doing it is you could do it with a pencil, where you can just press harder or put on another layer of graphite, and that will make it darker. Or the way I prefer is to use hatching. So you use lines that are going always in the same direction and then building up kind of planes of lines that are going vertical, horizontal, diagonal, however you want to keep doing it. Just keep adding them. There are other ways of creating tone, even creating tone with just ink. And we'll probably talk about those in the future. Things like adding little dots. Maybe you've seen pointillism in museums is a way of representing tone or color also with dots that keep building up. You can do it with brush strokes. You can do it by mixing colors. You can do it by mixing a certain color into another color. So you might start out with a red, and then you introduce, say, some blue into it, and it becomes purple and becomes darker. So there's so many different ways of depicting tone. I love the process of building up layers and layers and layers. Try out all these different techniques. Try also building some bars, some charts like I showed you, and try to get your gradations to go as perfectly from dark to light. So theoretically, I can take this little bar chart that we made, and I can look at it and I can compare myself, and I can go, okay, which lines up with which part here? Is this the darkest? What's the darkest? This is the midtone. What's the midtone? And then By looking at your subject, you know what part is in what degree of light, and by looking at your bar chart, you know how to make it. These are the tools that you need to use to make anything look three-dimensional, to make it look like it's toned, that it has volume. There's no incredible magic to it. It's just about observation. It's also great to look at great artists like Rembrandt. Rembrandt is the master of light, but there's also artists who just draw in line. Robert Crumb is one of my favorite examples. He uses hatching in incredibly intricate ways to depict volume and to make drawings that look energetic and dimensional. So you can have a lot of fun with three-dimensional drawing, and I'm sure we're going to do more lessons about this in the future, but I hope this has been a good introduction to you and help you to understand the science, as it were, of volume and light. Try some different exercises, set up a little display for yourself, get a light, and once you feel pretty good about it, we'll go on to the next video.